I've been given the privilege to introduce our speaker. But I think you've all met him already through his meditation, because that's the essence of Bruce, is the peace, the love, the caring for people, that gentleness. That you've met him. I'll give you a few details about his life. He's a counselor at First Colonial Psychotherapy. He is responsible for, at times, for keeping the fellowship going through his generosity and his getting out and repairing things and all that. He is, of course, the music minister, making the music selections. And through, like, his meditation today, see the influence we have on others when we're in the Spirit. Susan sang like I've never seen her before, and I think it, through the meditation, created the energy field here that allowed her just to be who she is. So we've met Susan at another level of her love and her caring. So I'm going to ask you to give a nice, heartfelt, silent welcome. Don't break the connection. And we'll bring Bruce up here, but clap if you want. That's good. All right, brother.
Thank you.
He's also the best friend you could ever have.
Gee, thanks. That was a wonderful song, Susan. Wow. Always when I talk here at the fellowship, I like to start the talk by asking you to help me with this talk, help ourselves, by just having a few moments of silence in which we ask God just to allow me to say the words that you need to hear today, not the words I want to say, but the words you need to hear. So if we can just be silent just for a few moments. Thank you. Amen. Well, okay. The name of today's talk is The Ego, Then and Now. And the way I've structured this talk is I'm going to first take a kind of a quick look at some of the teachings of the Buddha 2,600 years ago. His teachings about the way our mind works and how it affects us and how the role it plays in this journey that we call the awakening process. He was talking about this 2,600 years ago, and then we're going to just, zoom up ahead to the year 2012 and ask us where are we at today with this in terms of our understanding of the relationship between our spirit, our mind, and our physical body. And so, 2,600 years ago, a guy named Siddhartha Gautama walked the planet. And Eckhart Tolle, who I'm going to be referencing in this talk, because he's one of my favorite spiritual teachers at this time, Eckhart Tolle said that he believes that the Buddha, this person that we came to be called the Buddha, which means the awakened one, it's a title, he believes the Buddha was the first human being in the history of humanity to fully awaken to who he was. He was the first one of us, right, to fully flower. And then his work was to help the rest of us to figure out what he had figured out so we could do the same thing. This is what true spiritual teachers are all about. And he gave us what he calls the Four Noble Truths. He summed up all of his teachings. He says there's these four noble truths I want you to know about. Noble truth number one is called Dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A. The Buddha looked around his world, this is 2,600 years ago, but it could also be today, and everywhere he looked he saw suffering. There was suffering everywhere, whether you were the king or whether you were the pauper. Everybody, he says, it seems like we just can't escape suffering in life. He talked about the suffering we experience from physical illness, mental illness, the suffering we experience as we grow older and we start having all these losses, the suffering that we experience when we have someone that we dearly love or some situation we dearly love that is taken away from us, the pain we experience when we have these feelings of abandonment. He talked about another major category. He was a kind of an analytical guy, you know. He said another major category is the exact opposite of what I just said. He says we experience pain when we have people in our lives or situations in our lives that we feel saddled with, we can't get rid of, and we're stuck. But everywhere he looked, he saw suffering. He called that dukkha. Now, he said that the cause of all suffering, and this is where his genius came in, he told us, okay, it's obvious there's a lot of suffering in the planet, but what do we do about it? And he says, well, the cause of it, you've got to figure out what the cause is before you can really do anything. A good doctor has to first make a diagnosis. This patient's sick. Let me make a diagnosis. He says, well, the cause is what he called tanha, T-A-N-H-A. Tanha can be translated to mean desire. But this is not just any type of desire, this word tanha. Tanha is referring to selfish desires, desires of our ego mind, as opposed to desires from our spirit. The desire to be a good person, to help people, to make the planet a better place. He's not talking about those desires. He's talking about desires that come from the ego mind, from the little self that begins with a little s, rather than the true self, which begins with a big S. And he says, so tanha is the problem. Now, if I ask you, do you feel like you're a selfish person, a self-centered person? The answer probably would be, well, actually, I don't think I'm like that, you know. I look at all the good things I do in my life. I try to help people. And but this is very subtle, this whole idea of selfishness. It's very, very subtle. For example, if you go home today and the phone rings and you pick it up and someone says, the policeman's on the phone, he says, you know, your neighbor's car got stolen last night and we're letting all the neighbors know about it because we think it might happen again. Well, your reaction is going to be, geez, that's a shame, you know. I better lock my car door tonight, you know. I feel sorry for my neighbor. But what would be the difference if you go home today and the phone rings and this is Officer O'Reilly. Mr. Shelton, I hate to tell you, but your car got stolen last night. As a matter of fact, it was wrecked on the interstate in a police chase. It's beyond repair. Wouldn't I have a different reaction to that than if it was my neighbor's car? Because that one word, mine, me, my car got stolen, I'd have a totally different reaction. I mean, I care about my neighbor, but when it's me, it's a little different, you know. This is the way the ego works, you see. The ego is concerned about me, not us type of thing. And in true spirituality, see, it's all about us. And so he says tanha is the problem, is the cause of all suffering. It's interesting, Edgar Cayce once was asked the same question. He says, what's the cause of all problems? And Edgar Cayce's response was, the cause of all problems is the self, meaning the self that begins with a little s. Now, what do we do about this? Well, if we know what the cause is. Noble Truth number 3 says that, well, the solution is to overcome tanha. And then Noble Truth number 4, he writes out a prescription. Being a good physician that he was, he writes out a prescription. This is exactly what you do. This is Noble Truth number 4. He called that the Eightfold Path. And he listed 8 practices that we would become involved in, such as meditation and right livelihood, right aspirations, and so forth. Last year when I spoke here, I went into some detail about these 8 Eightfold Path, but I won't do it today because of time limitations. I really want to kind of focus on where we're at today. So that's his 4 Noble Truths. Now let's zoom ahead to the year 2012. Where are we at today? What do we really understand about the way our minds work right now, today? Well, we have wonderful spiritual teachers. Eckhart Tolle is one. There are many others. And I really, really hope that everyone in this room has got at least one powerful spiritual teacher in your life. If you don't, it's a great practice to just open yourself up and just say, God, I really would appreciate a little help here. I feel overwhelmed. I'm going to open myself up to the right spiritual teachers to come into my life to kind of help me on this journey that I call living a light, right? And if you open yourself up, you see, teachers come. If you don't ask for it, though, it never happens. So if you really want to be open to new teachings. So a great teacher in my life has been Eckhart Tolle. And if you ask yourself, what do you consist of? Well, the answer could be, I consist of 3 parts. Physical body, flesh and blood, no argument about that. Mind, I have a mind. It has 2 dimensions, only 2 dimensions. Thoughts on the one hand, feelings on the other. It's a simple model, but it's very profound. But then we have this third part of who we are. Now, this third part of who we are cannot really be described with words. That's the first thing to understand. This third part of who we are is beyond the concepts of the rational mind, okay? Beyond the concepts of the ego mind. This third part is so wonderful and so grand and so comprehensive that we just can't put it in words. But we can, if we understand that, we can still use words to point us in the right direction. And so, using words, we can say, this third part of us is the essence of who we are. It's the center of our being. It's the place where God resides. Using Christian terminology, it's where the kingdom of heaven, as Jesus taught us, is to be found. It's where, using Buddhist terminology, it's where nirvana is to be found. But it's all within, you see. This is the third part of who we are. Now, it's very interesting to see how these 3 parts of who we are interrelate with one another. The most important thing to understand is that who we truly are, and this was said in one of the inspirational readings last Sunday, who we truly are, you see, is we're spiritual beings who have a body and a mind. We're not minds that are having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings who have a body and a mind. Now, my body and my mind is the greatest gift the universe has given to me. They're sacred. Providing my body and my mind is my servant and doesn't turn into my master. That's the problem. When the mind takes over, particularly the mind, when it takes over, all hell breaks loose. That's when all suffering starts. It's when we and what happens is our minds are so ingenious that they have this tendency to literally take over and block to the point that we lose contact with our center, with the essence of who we are, and that's when all the problems start. See, all problems occur when we lose touch with our center, when we're no longer, as the reading said today, rooted in being. Okay? Does everybody hear that? That's the most important thing you'll hear today, is that all problems occur when we lose contact with God's presence within our own self. Okay? So, it's kind of like the way Eckhart Tolle explains it. He says it's kind of like we have our own personal kingdom, and on the throne we have the king, right? Who's our true self, running the kingdom. But what happened was, at some point in the past, the ego mind came in and removed the true king from the throne, and the king became the true king was banished from the kingdom. And he's been banished for so long that we've actually forgotten who we truly are. We've actually forgotten who the king is. And we look at the throne now and we see the king up there and we think this is who we are. I am my thoughts and my feelings. So Eckhart Tolle says it's like we have an imposter sitting on the throne telling us this is who we are. And that causes lots of problems because we listen to this king to solve all of our problems, and we keep having all these problems in our life. We keep, worrying about things, depression problems, anger problems, because we listen to our thoughts and our feelings, you see, which is this imposter king, is taken over. Now, if this king was a servant as he's supposed to be, there would be a different situation. But unfortunately, it's taken over. And the problem can also be described like this. It's like you have this town in which all these fires are occurring. There's an arson at work. And the townspeople go to the fire chief and say, we got to stop this. We got to catch whoever's doing all these terrible fires. They're destroying our city, and the fire chief assures everybody he's doing everything he possibly can to put out the fires. But the fires continue, week after week, year after year. And it turns out that the problem is the arsonist is the fire chief. So no wonder we can't figure out how to put the fires out. Isn't that a problem? We got the wrong person. So we go to our ego mind, and ask, please help me with this, please help me with that. And the ego mind can help us to a certain point. But the problems of life become so overwhelming. And then the ego mind develops all these, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending how you look at it, being the creative being that it is, the ego mind creates thoughts and beliefs that are negative. And then that creates all sorts of problems for us that we then have to deal with. Beliefs that are rooted in fear. When I say negative, I'm simply talking about beliefs that are rooted in fear rather than rooted in being, rooted in our center. And then that causes all sorts of problems. Now, the solution to the problem, this is a modern day equivalent of the Eightfold Path here. The solution to the problem is, number one, we have to recognize what the problem is. You see? That's the first thing, is to recognize the difference between who we really are and our minds. That's the first part, is to recognize the problem and recognize that our minds are causing the problems when it takes over and cuts us off from our center. That's the first part of any problem-solving process, is to identify the problem. With the problem identified, number two, we want to take a look at how the mind works. Our mind is very fascinating how it works. Scientists tell us that we have between 30 to 70,000 thoughts every day that go across our mind. I first heard that at a conference a few years ago, and I attended a professional conference, and I was kind of doubtful, because I thought, now how, even with the most modern instruments, how can anybody measure the number of thoughts we actually have? How can you measure 70,000 thoughts a day, right? So I really wanted some verification, and I heard it from several other sources then. So I turned to the modern day genie it's available to all of us. It's called Dr. Google. Dr. Google is incredible, isn't he? I put in, how many thoughts do we have every day? And all these little websites popped up, and sure enough, one of them was the University of California in San Diego Medical Center, and it said, they quoted that figure. They said we have up to 70,000 thoughts every day. So this is apparently an amazing figure, but apparently it's scientifically validated. So anyway, we have all these thoughts. Now, most of the thoughts that we have, not all the thoughts, but most of the thoughts that we have of these that roll across the screens of our mind, the windows of our mind, are involuntary, they are automatic, and they are repetitive. Okay? Most of the thoughts that go across our mind are not really serving any useful purpose in the sense that they're making our life better or helping anybody else. They're just thoughts that go across our mind. If you've ever practiced like Buddhist meditations, where you follow your breath and you try to follow your breath, you become aware as to how your mind constantly, all these thoughts keep coming in, that interfere with your concentration. And but all these thoughts keep coming. And the idea is that we really need to figure out what can we do so that these thoughts are not controlling us, because some of these thoughts are very happy thoughts, aren't they? They make us feel good. A lot of the thoughts we have of the past or the future are thoughts that are not so good. They're worrisome thoughts. How many times have you been sleeping at night? I know it's happened to me, where I'd wake up to go to the bathroom at 3 o'clock in the morning, and a thought comes to my mind out of the clear blue, and it's a negative thought. And I can't seem to put it down. It just starts rolling. It has a life of its own. And I can't fall back to sleep. And that's an example of the problem that I'm talking about. What do we do about this? Well, Eckhart Tolle wrote a fantastic book in 1999 called The Power of Now, and another book called The New Earth, which came out in 2005, in which he talks about the way the mind works. And he says that the way the ego mind works is that just about 99% of the thoughts we have are either about the future or they're about the past. Okay? Just think about the thoughts you have. Either the thoughts that come to your mind are usually going to be about the past or about the future. Now, the only time you and I are actually alive, right, and exist is when? Right now. This is the only moment that we actually are alive. Now, an hour ago, it was 11:15. We have a memory that as to what was going on. People were coming up at that time, I think, and we were doing the candle lighting, and so we have a memory. But that's all it is a memory. It's just a thought form in our mind. The past, whether it was 1 minute ago, an hour ago, a year ago, or 10 lifetimes ago, is no more than a thought in our mind. It's a thought form in our mind. When? Right now. Okay? Now, an hour from now, we can project ahead, and we can envision that an hour from now it'll be about 1:13 at that time. That the service will be over. I promise I'll be finished talking by then. And we'll probably at that time we'll probably be going out to get some lunch. We can envision an hour from now what will be happening. But guess what? It's the same thing. It's just a thought in my mind. It's a figment of my imagination. Whether it's 1 minute from now, an hour from now, a year from now, or 10 lifetimes ahead. It's just a thought in my mind. So in a sense, you see, time doesn't really exist other than it's all right up here. You see? When? Right now. Now, this is extremely important to understand and to get, because the only time any of us can connect with our center, with the center of our being, which is what it's all about, the only time we can connect with God, if you'd like to use the Christian terminology, is in the present moment. You see? I can have thoughts about God in the past or thoughts about God in the future, but the only time I can experience God, experience true peace and joy and love, that comes from the Spirit within myself, is right now. So this is the problem. Our minds are constantly going back and going forward, going back and going forward. And it takes us away from the now, which takes us away from our center. Well, no wonder our lives are such a mess. No wonder we're so unhappy. No wonder we're worrying all the time. And we're angry and we're depressed and everything's just so... Because we're constantly lost with this mind with all these thoughts going back and forth. So it's extremely important to understand that one of our most important practices can be to always, as best we can, try to refocus our attention when we're worried about things upon the present moment. It turns out that 99.9% of the time, the present moment is really okay. It's worrying about what's going to happen 10 moments from now that's the problem. The problem is I'm worried about what's going to happen when I go to the dentist this Wednesday at 9 o'clock and have that root canal. Have that thought in my mind, right? But this actual moment is okay. And 99% of the time, the present moment is okay. What worries us so much and upsets us and cuts us off from our inner peace is worrying about things in the future, or maybe beating ourselves up for something that happened, some mistake we made in the past, or some resentment we might have towards somebody for something we feel like they said or did to us in the past. Resentments are very toxic energy. If we have any resentments towards anybody, it's so vital that we, number one, identify the problem, that it's toxic, it's not serving any useful purpose, it's not making my life any better at all. All that resentment is doing is robbing me of the only thing in my life that really counts, which is my peace of mind. Okay? It's all it's doing. So if I identify the problem, now what do I do about it? How do I let it go? Well, it's very difficult to do this, isn't it? Because even if we identify the problem that resentments are not healthy, it's really hard to let them go. An example of this is Eckhart Tolle talks about the story of the duck with the human mind. Okay? The duck with the human mind. Imagine, most of us have been to parks, where we have ponds and we see the ducks out there. And most of us have witnessed this happen where you'll have a duck and he'll be in his territory, and this other duck comes in and they have a turf fight, And the weaker duck paddles away and he flaps his wings. Usually the battle's real quick, by the way. He flaps his wings to let go of all that excess adrenaline and energy that he needed when he was in the fight or flight. But the battle's over now, so now he needs to let go of all that toxic energy that's now would just make him, would not be healthy for him. So he shakes his wings and he sails off. And then a few minutes later, you look across, and that duck that lost the battle, he's over there paddling around as if nothing happened. He's now in the now. You see? Animals have a great deal to teach us about wisdom and how to live in the present moment. Animals are not worried about whether the Social Security system is going to fall down, next year, and they're going to lose all their Social Security. They're not worried about even the food they're going to get tomorrow. They're just worried about they're not worried, they're just working on doing what they got to do to get the food they need right now. So animals are great teachers to us. Now, just imagine, I told you the story, this metaphor is called the story of the duck with a human mind. Imagine how this duck would be if he had a human mind, all right? The duck, we're going to give these, because it has a human mind, we're going to give these ducks names. We got Joe, who's the alpha duck. He's got his territory, and Charlie's coming into Joe's territory. Well, Charlie comes in, they have a battle. Joe makes short work of Charlie, and Charlie's leaving, right? He's paddling away. Now, the difference would be this. The scenario would kind of play out like this. As Charlie's going away, he has all these thoughts come to his mind about, that Joe was horrible. He was terrible to me just now. I'm looking around the pond. All the other ducks are looking at me. I feel terribly humiliated. I'll never, ever forget Joe for what he just did to me. He humiliated me in front of the ducks. I'm going to go out and take some martial arts lessons. I'm going to build myself up. And I swear to God, before I die, I'm going to beat Joe in this territorial thing. I'm going to take over his territory. I swear I'm going to do that. So these thoughts start rolling around in poor Charlie's mind, right? But it doesn't stop there, right? 3 o'clock in the morning, Charlie's like me, being a human mind, now he's going to the bathroom, right? At 3 in the morning. He starts thinking about what had happened the day before. He can't stop. This thought keeps going. He can't sleep, so the sun's coming up, and he can't get over this anger and resentment he's got towards what Joe did to him. But it doesn't stop there. A year later, 10 years later, these thoughts keep coming because he never is able to let go of his resentment. You see, it's just really, really hard to let go of it, right? So can anybody identify with this? This is the problem. This is the way the ego mind works. It grabs a hold of something fearful and doesn't want to let go of it. Even though it's causing us a lot of misery, and we can even understand that, it's just hard to let go. Another example of this is a story of these 2 Zen monks that are walking through the forest named Tanzen and Ikaido. This is a Buddhist story. They're walking through the forest, and it had just been raining real hard the night before, so they come to this river, and the water is swollen in the river. And they notice this young woman down near them trying to cross, and she can't cross this stream because the water is swollen, right? And she has this beautiful kimono on, and she knows if she tries to cross the stream that she'll get it all dirty and wet. So Tanzen goes up to her and says, "Would you like some help? I'll be glad to pick you up and carry you across the stream. It's just a short distance." And she says, "Thank you very much." And he does this. He carries this young lady across the stream, puts her down. She thanks him, and then the 2 monks are on their way. Well, about 4 or 5 hours later, they're just getting near the monastery now, and Aikido blurts out, he says, "I can't hold it back anymore." He says, "Why did you do that? You know us monks are not supposed to be touching females. Why did you do that?" Tanzen says, "I put her down 5 hours ago. Why are you still carrying her in your mind?" Isn't that interesting? It's a beautiful story, and it illustrates the dilemma that we all have. We just can't put down these negative thoughts. It's so difficult. And so I'm going to let's just jump right into, I'm going to finish up because we started, I didn't get a chance to start till about 5 to 12 here, so I'm trying to keep my time down so I don't, put you to sleep, and I don't want us to run too late, so I'm just going to kind of end here just another few minutes. But I really want to talk about what do we do, right? What the heck do we do with letting go of negative thoughts and living in the present moment? Well, Eckhart Tolle says that whenever you've got a negative thought about anyone, it can be a resentment, it can be a feelings of guilt about some mistake maybe you made in the past. It can be a negative thought worrying about some test you got to take, some licensure test, or worrying about, as I said earlier, seeing the dentist this week or speaking on Sunday morning before everybody. It can be any kind of a worry like that. And how do you deal with worries like that? And he teaches this 3-point technique, very simple. The first thing we do, whatever it is you're most afraid of, is you face your fear, okay? You face your fear. The second thing you do is you accept it. Number 3, you let it go, okay? So, number 1, you ask yourself, what is it, if I'm resentful, that's a good example. Everybody in this room has probably got at least somebody in your life that you have a struggle with letting go of the resentment, even though you don't want it anymore. Well, the first thing you do is you face the thought. You face the feeling. You embrace it. That resentment, because it comes up, I don't like it. It makes me feel bad. It's almost like facing a dragon, okay? It's like, and if I'm facing a dragon, and that dragon has been breathing fire on me in the past, the last thing I want to do is face it again. Matter of fact, I just want to run like heck in a different direction. But that doesn't solve the problem. See, all that does is it results in our taking this fear of this dragon and repressing it, sticking it in my subconscious mind. It eats away at me. So the first point here is, if you have any type of a negative fear about anything, is you face it, you embrace it. You do not run from it, okay? This is true in the time of the Buddha, he taught this. It's true right now in modern psychotherapy when people have anxiety problems. The secret is to face whatever it is you're most afraid of, okay? The second part is to accept it, okay? The alternative to accepting the fact that I do in fact have a resentment towards somebody, what we normally do is we struggle with it. Like, I can't stand it, I hate it, I hate this resentment, I can't stand it. And the more I struggle with it, however, it has an opposite effect of getting rid of it. It actually strengthens it, okay? So instead of feeling bad that I've got guilt about this or I'm worried about that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to accept the fact this is just there. I've really got a resentment, okay, towards somebody. Now the third part is the tricky part. That's letting go. Well, as we said earlier, that's the big problem. Is how do I let it go? There's 2 ways to do this that I'd recommend to you. Number 1, we can call this the Judeo-Christian Islamic way, is whenever you're fearful about something, like a thought, a resentment comes in your mind, or something that you're, fearful about, simply in your daily prayers offer it up to God. Dear God, you take my depression. I'm tired of this depression. It's milked me really good. I've had enough of it. I'm just offering it up to you. Now, if you do that with belief and with faith, okay, it'll work. You just offer it up. You offer up your resentments, your angers, your jealousies, your self-condemnation, your fears about something that maybe is going to be happening in the future, and your mind's telling you worst-case scenario. You say, God, just take all this anxiety from me. I don't want it anymore. Okay? That's the first way we can work on letting go. Now, it may come back the next day. The thought may come back. Maybe we didn't have a complete healing. But that's okay, because every time we do this, that thought then, which is simply a thinking pattern in our mind, using the example of a resentment, it's just a thinking pattern in my mind. Every time I offer it up to God, I'm weakening that thought pattern. And so every time I do this, it becomes weaker and weaker and weaker. I'm disempowering it, you see. So this is the whole idea. Just practice daily prayer. Here, God, you take my depression. You take my anger. You take my anxieties. Offer it up. Jesus said, cast your burdens upon my shoulders and I will give you rest. Jesus gives us a face. Other spiritual teachers give us a face. Some people find it much easier to pray to God through a spiritual teacher like Jesus or the Buddha or Krishna, rather than to a broad abstract concept like God. Whatever works for you, you see. But the idea is you offer it up to God. Now, the second way is, we'll call this the Buddhist, Taoist way, is mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness. What we do is when thoughts are going across our mind, we learn to be mindful of the thoughts, in other words, watching, observing, witnessing the thoughts, rather than identifying with the thoughts. So there's that old resentment coming back. I can't seem to let go of that resentment I got towards Joe Smith because of what he did 10 years ago to me. I haven't even seen him in 10 years, but I still got this resentment. It just came up out of the clear blue. Now, the idea is, in this Buddhist method called mindfulness, is we're just mindful of it. Oh, look at that resentment. Now, what the ego mind wants to do is grab that resentment, that thought, and start obsessing about it. So mindfulness is the exact opposite, you see, of the way our ego mind wants to work. Our ego mind wants to grab that resentment or that worry or that anger and start obsessing about it. And once it takes over, then the mind just has a field day, right? So the idea is we learn to just watch our thoughts. It's just a thought, you see. Now, when we do that, what we're doing psychologically is we're now objectifying this negative thought, this resentment. I'm here. The part of me that's actually identifying it is the essence of who I am. It's a healthy me. So the healthy me is watching this ego, these thoughts, and I'm objectifying it, which means there's a distance now between me. Guess what? That thought, the more I do this, it starts losing its power. It's another way, a second way of disempowering negative thoughts. And so the Buddhists have very advanced meditation techniques in which such as the Vipassana meditation technique, in which this is their whole thing. Is learning just to watch our thoughts. The Buddhists say the thoughts are a lot like clouds. We look in the horizon, we see a cloud going like this. Now, if we just let that cloud alone, it just disappears. You see? But if we grab that cloud and start obsessing about it and thinking about it, which is the way our ego mind wants to behave, we start upsetting ourselves. And then the more I think about something negative, on the misery scale, on a 10-point misery scale, I can just watch the misery going up just like this. You see? But we do it to ourselves. You see? What I'm teaching you is an empowerment model. That you actually have the power to control the way you feel. And you have the power to connect with your center. All right. So I think my time is up. It's been a great joy having this opportunity to speak to you today, and love you a great deal. Thank you.